Buddhism is a world religion founded by the Buddha in ancient India. Buddhists seek wisdom, meaning, inner peace, and freedom from greed, hatred, and ignorance. Mutually sustaining life, a Buddhist call to a troubled world.
As a net is made up by a series of knots, so everything in this world is connected by a series of knots. If anyone thinks that the mesh of a net is an independent, isolated thing, he is mistaken.
Today, we are ready to move on to the second of the four marks of existence, which is all conditioned phenomena lacks substantial entity, or simply, life is interdependent. I should qualify this by saying that these expressions differ slightly from a more common English translation of this mark, which is usually rendered as non-self or non-ego. However, non-self and non-ego can not only be misleading, but also difficult to explain fully in the limited time that we have. For this reason, I have chosen terms which I consider as being easier to understand. So, once again, all conditioned phenomena lacks substantial entity, or life is interdependent. All conditioned phenomena refers to all the objects of our experiences through our senses and thoughts. Substantial entity refers to anything that comes into being all by itself or exists on its own, without being dependent on anything else. However, the Buddha awakened to the truth that there is no such entity, for everything comes into being dependent on something else. For example, all living beings are born from two parents, or at least from some preceding forms. And once born, their very existence depends on others. This is illustrated in a well-known Buddhist metaphor known as the injurious net of jewels. The metaphor speaks of a net that extends endlessly throughout the whole universe in all directions. At each eye of the net is a jewel, and together all the jewels on the net produce a galactic bed of glistening and shimmering jewels. Each jewel emits a light. However, no one jewel can shine on its own, for it can shine only by receiving the illumination of the other jewels. And every other jewel is the same, for it has no ability to shine on its own. Each jewel reflects the illumination of all the other jewels. Hence, the jewels are mutually sustaining, reminding us of the overall title of this television program. Now, let me use an example that is intimately connected to our very existence. Hold your breath for a few seconds. Just a little longer. Okay, now take a breath. Had you gone much longer holding your breath, you would have started experiencing physical discomfort. This shows how little we can go without depending on air. We know this in our head, but are not fully aware with our whole being. Let me ask you, how many times did you breathe in the last 24 hours? Let's count each time you inhale and exhale as one time. If we time ourselves, most people inhale and exhale about 30 times a minute, which means 1,800 times an hour, or a total of 43,200 times a day. That's quite a few times, don't you think? So, in a sense, we are dependent on air 43,200 times a day. Now, conversely, the air itself is dependent on others, including us. As many of you know, oxygen in the air that that we breathe is produced through a process called photosynthesis. This process takes place in green plants and certain organisms, which in turn require water, sunshine, and carbon dioxide. And carbon dioxide comes partly from what we humans exhale. Therefore, the very production of oxygen is dependent partly on us. There is again a mutually sustaining relationship. Within this awareness of the mutually sustaining nature of our existence, I am constantly reminded of our connection and relation to the sun. Without it, we would obviously not be able to exist. Besides the many indispensable benefits it provides, the sun is also present in every breath we take, for sunlight is required in the production of oxygen. While we breathe with our lungs, the source of that breathing lies some 93 million miles away, and if we see that the sun is part of the greater solar system, which in turn is part of the Milky Way galaxy, which further is part of a vast universe, then from this perspective, we can say that the entire universe participates in each breath that we take. As my story of our breath shows, all things are interdependent, interconnected, and interrelated. All things originate as a result of a number of factors coming together. Nothing can emerge on its own and can be sustained by itself. This truth is also expressed in the Mahayana branch of Buddhism as all conditioned phenomena is empty of its own nature, or emptiness, shunyata. This has been translated also as nothingness. Hence, Buddhist teachers are often associated, particularly in the West, with a teaching of emptiness or nothingness. This reminds me of a humorous greeting card that I recently saw about the Dalai Lama. It's his birthday, and he is surrounded by a group of his top disciples who look pleased with the present they had just handed him. The Dalai Lama appears elated as he looks down into the bag holding his present. However, there actually isn't any gift in the bag. Yet, the Dalai Lama exclaims, "Wow, this is just what I wanted. Nothing." What's interesting is that although I found it funny, this greeting card doesn't correctly convey the significance of the second mark of existence. For emptiness does not mean an absence of things, but an absence of anything that exists completely independent of anything else. And this truth is not pessimistic, world-negating, or nihilistic. It, in fact, recognizes how we humans are intimately connected to our natural and social world. This outlook is presented in one of the most provocative books of Buddhism in recent years, Westminster's Buddha Nature. This work by a teacher in the Theravada-based insight meditation tradition makes effective use of the findings in the physical and biological sciences to reinforce the Buddhist claim of interconnectedness, particularly of our body with the physical world and other living beings. He shows how we are related to our physical world through the traditional Buddhist categories of the four fundamental elements: earth, heat, water, and air. The earth element is characterized by solidity, hardness, and mass. One of the earth elements is gravity, something that is ubiquitous but taken for granted and rarely noticed. It is this gravity that is holding us down to this earth when sitting, lying, or walking. The heat element is best expressed in the process we call photosynthesis and using light as an energy source. In photosynthesis, plants produce food and oxygen by a combination of sunlight, carbon dioxide, and water. The other component of this process, which he calls burning, explains how plants and animals transform the sunlight into heat energy needed for fueling their lives. The water element is readily apparent, as 75% of our body's mass is made up of water. Life began in the sea, and its chemical makeup is similar to the blood and sweat flowing through our veins and flesh. The air element is characterized most prominently in our breathing. With each breath, we inhale the essential oxygen molecules into our body and then exhale carbon dioxide molecules. Biological studies have shown with much greater clarity that in the process of human evolution, we came to embody the characteristics of the previous forms of life, from reptiles to other mammals to human-like beings. So every human body replicates the entire evolutionary process during our embryonic maturation in the womb. The history of evolution is expressed in this very body. A similar pattern is seen in the makeup of our brain. Our brain is composed of three main parts: reptilian, mammalian, and primate. While in our mother's womb, these three parts develop sequentially. The first to develop is the reptilian, followed by the mammalian, and the last to develop is the primate brain. When we see ourselves in this light, we cannot help but to feel a sense of deep kinship and oneness with the world and all living beings. Our very body is a byproduct of the entire world. Each of our bodies is like a wave in an immense ocean. Each wave arises from the ocean and continues to be sustained by the ocean. And when conditions lead to the breakdown of the body, or what we call death, the body is no longer an autonomous being. But that does not mean that the body disappears. Yet, like the wave, it merely changes form to rejoin the rest of the ocean, of which we had always been an integral part. Conversely, a person is bound to experience fear and isolation if he sees himself only as the wave and not as part of the immense ocean. This is the message being conveyed to us in today's scriptural passage. As a net is made up by a series of knots, so everything in this world is connected by a series of knots. If anyone thinks that the mesh of a net is an independent, isolated thing, he is mistaken. Please join us next week when a Zen Buddhist nun will be here to share her life in a monastery.
We at Bukkyo Dendo Kyokai pursue peace and happiness for people around the world. We have published the Buddhist teachings into 41 languages and donated our publication to hotels and other facilities in 55 countries. We would like to share the Buddhist teachings with people around the world. That's our mission. Visit our website for more information.